The night was alive only moments ago, a restless desert humming beneath a silver sky. But then, without warning, everything stopped. The dunes froze mid-curve, the scattered dust hung like faint smoke in the air, and the world seemed to hold its breath. A traveler stood alone at the edge of the valley, his cloak unmoving though he stood where wind once roared. He had crossed many lands, yet never had he witnessed silence so complete that even his heartbeat sounded like a stranger's knock in an empty room. He turned slowly, expecting the stillness to break, but the stars above him no longer flickered. They stood like watchful eyes, frozen mid-glow, reflecting a power beyond the rhythm of creation. The man whispered the basmala under his breath, his voice trembling as it vanished without echo. No sound returned. It was as if the world had become a sealed glass, every motion, every breath trapped within a moment, stretched by unseen hands. Then came the scent, faint but ancient, like rain that had never fallen. It drifted across the valley, stirring memories not his own. The traveler's gaze followed its trail until his eyes found the silhouette of a city carved from stone. Towers rose from the desert like the ribs of a sleeping giant, and pale moonlight traced their edges with the color of forgotten glory. The air between him and the city shimmered faintly, as though time itself trembled there. He took one step forward. The sand beneath his feet gave a muffled sound, soft, hesitant, like the sigh of something long buried. His hand brushed the carved mark of an old signpost, worn smooth by centuries. The letters were in a language he could not read, yet the meaning pressed upon his heart. Pride had once spoken here. His eyes caught the faint movement of a flag upon a distant tower, a flag that fluttered, though there was no wind. The traveler felt a pull, not of curiosity, but of decree. Something willed him closer, past the silent dunes and toward the city's shadow. As he walked, he noticed strange impressions upon the sand, footprints but not of men or beasts. They were deep and circular, glowing faintly with a golden hue, as if the ground remembered where something holy had once passed. His chest tightened. The Quranic verses his mother had recited in his youth whispered back to him, "Do they not travel through the earth and see what was the end of those before them?" His every step felt like trespassing upon a sacred secret. The air thickened with meaning. The stars dimmed. And for a fleeting moment he thought he heard a sound, a whisper too faint to be wind, too deliberate to be chance. It spoke not in words but in weight, pressing upon his soul like an unseen gaze. He froze, heart pounding. The silence deepened. Even his thoughts seemed to echo. Ahead, the gates of the city loomed, two colossal slabs of stone etched with scenes of triumph. Kings carved upon them raised their hands toward the heavens, and beneath their feet, smaller figures bowed in eternal submission. The traveler's torch flickered though there was no air to feed it. The flame stretched sideways, bending toward the gate as if drawn by something within. He hesitated at the threshold, the edge of human understanding. Then with quiet reverence he whispered again, "Bismillah," and crossed into the forgotten. As his foot touched the cold stone of the city's heart, the wind sighed once, long and mournful. And then the silence swallowed him whole. And Allah knows best. The air inside the city felt older than time itself, heavy with the dust of forgotten breath. The traveler's footsteps echoed faintly, though the streets were too wide for sound to return. Towers leaned inward like weary sentinels, their surfaces carved with faces that once smiled at the world they believed they ruled. Now those faces were cracked, their eyes hollow, their triumph turned to mockery by silence. The traveler brushed his fingers along a wall and felt its surface tremble faintly beneath his touch, not from movement, but from memory. The moonlight spilled through the archways, casting silver rivers across the ground. The carvings glimmered like half-buried bones, each telling a story of glory and defiance. He paused before one that showed men raising mountains, shaping valleys, and harnessing storms, their pride carved in stone, their hands stretched toward the sky, as if challenging the one who created it. Beneath it, in letters nearly erased by sand, a phrase lingered. "We are eternal." The traveler's breath caught. Even the arrogance of their inscription felt alive, defiant still beneath layers of ruin. He walked deeper, passing what once might have been a marketplace. Stalls stood empty, baskets petrified mid-form, as though the city had been seized in a single heartbeat. The silence carried faint vibrations, not sound, but feeling, as if the stones themselves whispered warnings too faint for ears, too ancient for words. He closed his eyes and listened. The whispers came clearer now, the shuffle of feet that no longer existed, the laughter of children turned to wind, the faint hum of a prayer that was never answered. It was a city remembering itself. A faint glow flickered ahead, pulling him toward a half-collapsed structure. Inside, the air shimmered faintly, filled with motes of golden dust suspended in stillness. At the center stood a pedestal of marble cracked down the middle. Upon it rested a fragment of a tablet, its surface etched in the same forgotten script he had seen before. The marks glowed faintly, as if refusing to die. He knelt beside it and traced the edges with care. His heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the feeling that he stood at the intersection of the seen and the unseen, where history and judgment met. The letters twisted faintly under his touch, rearranging not in sight but in meaning, until his heart understood what his eyes could not read. We forgot the one who gave us time. He drew back sharply, his fingers trembling. The silence deepened again, pressing in from all sides. The traveler turned toward the doorway, sensing the faintest shift in the air, a movement too deliberate to be wind. The glow dimmed. Somewhere behind him, a stone fell, rolling once before stopping completely. He felt watched, not by something alive, but by something aware. The carvings on the walls seemed to change beneath the torchlight, their eyes following him as he stepped back into the street. The city's emptiness no longer felt abandoned. It felt waiting. He stopped and looked up. The moon now hung directly above the tallest tower, and in its pale light he saw faint inscriptions curling upward along its surface like veins of gold. They pulsed once, then faded. A shiver passed through him as the whispers returned, louder now, 1,000 echoes of regret carried on air that should not exist. His torch flickered violently, the flame bending backward toward the gate he had entered. He clutched it tight and whispered a prayer for protection, but the only response was a soft exhale from the ruins, a sigh that seemed to breathe from beneath the earth itself. He turned slowly, his eyes catching movement near the far end of the square. A door stood slightly ajar, light leaking faintly through its cracks, golden and trembling like a heartbeat. The traveler hesitated, his pulse racing. The city was silent once more, yet that door, that single door, waited open, as if inviting him into the memory of a sin that refused to die, and Allah knows best. The traveler stepped through the open doorway, the faint golden light drawing him into a chamber half swallowed by sand. The air inside was thick, heavy with age, as if every grain carried a memory of defiance. His torchlight brushed against cracked walls adorned with faded inscriptions, stories carved by those who once believed their hands could outlast time. In the center of the room, half buried beneath fallen stone, lay a small wooden chest. Its surface was charred, its hinges rusted, yet the lock had dissolved to dust, as though it had never truly been meant to hold. He knelt beside it and brushed away the sand, the faint scent of burnt parchment rising as the lid creaked open. Inside, wrapped in fragments of woven linen, lay a scroll blackened along the edges but intact at its core. The parchment shimmered faintly when touched by firelight, the script glinting like threads of copper. He unrolled it carefully, the ancient fibers sighing as if exhaling centuries of silence. The writing was unlike any he had seen, neither Arabic nor any language of his age, but as his eyes lingered, its meaning unfurled in his heart rather than his mind. It spoke not of prophecy, but of remembrance. The words warned of a day when strength would blind the soul, when pride would silence truth, when cities would rise higher than the call to prayer that once echoed within them. It spoke of people who shaped mountains but forgot who made them stand, of a generation that measured mercy in wealth and power, and when the signs came, they laughed. His breath trembled as he traced a line that burned faintly beneath his finger, its meaning echoing through his chest. And so the wind was commanded to forget them. A shudder passed through him. He recalled the stillness of the valley, the frozen air, the moment when creation itself had stopped moving. The silence was not emptiness, it was remembrance. The world had obeyed a divine decree that they no longer could. The traveler lowered the scroll, his torchlight flickering weakly, and for a heartbeat he thought he heard faint voices around him, recitations lost to time, words once dismissed, now returning as echoes. He turned toward the walls and saw faint shadows shift across the carvings. Not his, but of figures kneeling, then fading, leaving behind shapes of despair. A whisper brushed against his ear, so soft it might have been his own thought. Warn those who still breathe. He froze, his heart pounding. The room seemed to pulse with unseen life, the very air vibrating with the remnants of revelation. The scroll in his hand grew warm, the ink glowing brighter until it illuminated the chamber like a quiet sunrise. For a moment he saw it, not the past, but the instant before it ended. The city alive with pride, its towers gleaming under a merciless sun. A prophet walking among them, voice steady, eyes heavy with sorrow. And the laughter that followed, echoing through the same streets, he now walked in silence. The vision faded as quickly as it came, leaving the air thick with the scent of dust and regret. The traveler pressed the scroll to his chest, whispering a prayer for understanding. The golden light began to dim, its final flicker tracing one last line upon the parchment. He who forgets gratitude shall remember loss. The letters faded into ash. When he looked up, the door through which he had entered stood open again, and beyond it the street waited, unchanged, yet not the same. He stepped outside, the wind still absent, the moon now pale and veiled by thin clouds. Behind him the chamber crumbled softly, sealing the scroll's resting place once more. The traveler knew he carried not its words, but its weight. Somewhere deeper within the city another light flickered, faint, rhythmic, like a pulse buried in stone, calling him onward to what the scroll had not yet revealed. And Allah knows best. The traveler followed the faint rhythmic glow deeper into the city's heart, its pulse guiding him like a silent call. Each step echoed against hollow streets that once held laughter, trade, and prayer, now replaced by a stillness that breathed memory. The wind had not returned, yet the air grew heavy, as though countless unseen eyes watched him from the walls. He reached a courtyard encircled by tall pillars, each carved with scenes of celebration and conquest. At its center stood a broken fountain, its basin dry but glimmering faintly with something more than reflection. He knelt beside it and saw faint inscriptions along the rim, not of kings or battles, but of a lone man standing beneath the sun, his hands raised, his face turned toward the heavens. The traveler traced the carving's edge, recognizing reverence in the tilt of the figure's head. This was not a ruler nor a craftsman. It was the messenger they had once walked beside but never listened to, the man who had pleaded for their hearts to soften before the command to forget them descended. The same man whose warnings they had met with laughter. A soft tremor passed through the earth. Dust fell from the pillars, and within the silence, he thought he heard faint voices, echoes of a time when words of truth had filled this place. The laughter that had once answered them returned, hollow and sharp, repeating from every wall until it faded into nothingness. The traveler's chest tightened. He could almost see it. The prophet walking through these streets, his robe trailing over the same stones, his voice calm, his eyes reflecting the mercy that had sent him. The people around him were proud, strong, untouched by fear. They had built their greatness with hands that never trembled, believing that the sun rose at their command. He closed his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the past breathed again. The fountain was full, its water shimmering like glass. The city roared with life, merchants shouting, children running, music echoing through the arches. And in the midst of it all, the prophet stood, his voice rising above the noise, calling them to remember the one who gave them all they had. The traveler could not hear the exact words, but their weight pressed against his heart like a forgotten verse. He saw their faces twist in arrogance, laughter spilling over truth. They mocked him not because they did not believe, but because belief would demand humility. The vision shattered. The city returned to ruin, its glory erased. The fountain was dry again, its carvings faintly glowing before dimming into stone. The traveler bowed his head, trembling. He felt an ache deep within, not only for them, but for every soul that had heard the truth and chosen pride instead of surrender. The air shifted, and he sensed a presence nearby. Not seen, but deeply felt, a calmness that stilled the fear in his chest. It was not the prophet himself, but the trace of his sincerity that still lingered in the air, untouched by time. The traveler whispered softly, his voice barely above silence. They laughed. But still, he warned them. The words carried no echo, but something unseen answered, not in sound, but in peace. A faint breeze, the first he had felt since entering the valley, brushed against his face. It carried a fragrance unlike any earthly scent, something pure, familiar, like mercy remembering itself. He looked toward the far end of the courtyard, where the faint glow that had guided him now drifted toward an arched passage. He followed it slowly, the faint wind circling around him like a whispering companion. Behind him, the fountain shimmered one last time before turning to stone completely. The traveler understood now, this was not a tale of punishment, but of pleading mercy rejected. Every ruin here was a reminder not of destruction, but of refusal. He stepped through the archway, the wind dying once more. Ahead, the light of the moon fell across a path of shattered columns leading toward the city's highest tower. The traveler's heart beat faster. He knew the next sign awaited him there. The sky itself would bear witness to what these people had once denied, and Allah knows best. The path to the tower wound upward through corridors of silence, where moonlight poured through cracks in the stone and painted the ground with trembling silver. The traveler's every step stirred faint echoes, as if the city itself remembered the weight of footsteps long gone. The faint wind that had guided him before was gone again, replaced by an eerie stillness that pressed upon his chest. When he reached the final stair, he paused, feeling a strange vibration beneath his feet, a slow, rhythmic pulse that did not belong to the earth. He emerged onto the tower's open terrace, the night vast and endless around him. The desert stretched out like a sleeping sea, and the stars shimmered quietly above, their light sharp as shards of glass. But something was wrong. The sky no longer moved as it should. The moon hung too still, too bright, its glow spreading across the horizon like molten silver. Then, without warning, it split. Its light fractured into 7 faint veils, spreading across the heavens in a silent ripple. The traveler stepped back, his heart thundering. The 7 veils pulsed once, and with each pulse, the shadows on the ground deepened, multiplying until the entire city seemed to exist in layers. One of stone, one of light, and one of something unseen. The air trembled. The traveler raised his eyes and saw the shadows move, not with the motion of wind or flame, but with will. They stretched across the ruins like living reflections, bending and weaving, each one cast by no body at all. The 7 veils of light above swirled like a great unseen storm gathering within silence. The traveler felt it in his bones, the same power that had once commanded the wind to still now watched him from above. He fell to his knees, breath shaking, whispering verses he barely remembered. A low hum filled the air, deep and resonant, not of sound but of vibration, the language of existence itself. The shadows lengthened, converging toward the tower, circling it like waves around a sinking ship. For a moment he thought he saw figures within them, outlines of men and women, proud and unbent, their eyes lifted to the same sky that now divided them from light. Their forms shimmered, flickered, then vanished into dust. The realization struck him. These were their echoes, remnants of souls whose arrogance had turned even light into witness. He looked upward again, and one of the veils began to descend, slow and graceful like a curtain of glass. It touched the highest spire, and the stone glowed faintly before cracking with a soundless break. Dust lifted in silence, drifting like smoke. The traveler felt no fear now, and only awe. The night had become a mirror, showing creation the memory of divine command. The 7 shadows merged briefly, forming a single vast shape across the desert, a shadow that bowed. And then, as quickly as it appeared, it dissolved into the earth. The hum faded. The veils drew back into the moon, leaving behind a sky unnaturally clear. Every star burned brighter than before, as if washed clean by remembrance. The traveler rose slowly, the silence now filled not with dread, but with meaning. He realized what he had witnessed was not destruction, but repetition, the universe replaying its warning through light and shadow. So those who still sought might understand. As he turned to descend, a final gust of wind rose from nowhere, sweeping across the tower and extinguishing his torch. He stood in the dark, his heart steady. The moon above was whole again, but its light felt changed, heavier, wiser, as if it carried the memory of what had just been revealed. The traveler descended the stairway, the faint echoes of the unseen fading behind him. Somewhere in the distance, a single bell-like sound echoed, not of metal, but of the sky itself remembering its vow, and Allah knows best. The traveler descended from the tower with the memory of the 7 veils still glowing faintly behind his eyes. The night was too still, too vast, the silence carrying a weight that pressed upon the soul. As he reached the base, he felt the faint pulse beneath the ground again, slower now, almost like the heartbeat of the earth itself growing weak. The stars above seemed to flicker, not with light, but with exhaustion. He turned toward the east, where dawn should have been rising. But the horizon remained locked in twilight, neither night nor morning, suspended in an endless pause. He walked through the streets, the ruins pale beneath the unmoving sky. Each doorway he passed seemed to hold a breath that never released. The city felt trapped in a single heartbeat, as though the command for dawn had been delayed by the will of the one who wrote its rhythm. The traveler's shadow stretched across the stones, long and sharp, though no sun had risen to cast it. He whispered verses softly, his voice the only sound left in creation. Yet even his words fell heavy, absorbed by walls that no longer listened. Then from somewhere deep within the city came a faint vibration, the low, distant rumble of thunder. But there were no clouds, no wind. The sound came from beneath, from the heart of the land itself. The traveler stopped, feeling the ground tremble softly beneath his feet. A faint current of air brushed past him, carrying the scent of rain that had not yet fallen. He looked up, and for a moment the sky flickered, not with lightning, but with memory. He saw flashes of people moving through the streets, faces lit with the fire of arrogance, laughter echoing through the same avenues now filled with dust. Then the images broke apart like smoke. The air grew colder. He could feel time itself faltering, each second stretching too long. The horizon flickered again, faint light forming, then dimming as though creation hesitated to begin another day. He dropped to his knees, pressing his palms to the earth. The sand beneath his fingers pulsed once, warm and alive before falling still. It was then that he understood. This city's final dawn had never come. The decree that ends all decrees had frozen it between night and judgment. The storm that followed had not been wind or rain. It had been silence itself, sweeping through every breath, every voice, leaving only remembrance. The traveler felt tears forming, not from fear, but from awe. The stillness was not absence. It was command. Every atom obeyed, holding its place until the divine word allowed it to move again. He whispered, "Subhanallah," his voice trembling, the sound of it swallowed by still air. Above him, the stars began to fade one by one, not setting but dimming, as if turning their gaze elsewhere. The moonlight thinned, spilling across the ruins like spilled milk, soft and sorrowful. Then, from far beyond the city's walls, a new sound rose, faint, like a breath being drawn for the first time. The traveler looked toward the horizon and saw the edges of the world quiver. Light began to stir, hesitant, uncertain. The line between night and day wavered, then stilled. The wind returned, soft and warm, moving through the streets with reverent calm, touching every stone, every doorway, as if granting permission to exist again. The traveler stood, feeling its weightless brush upon his face, but the dawn did not come. The light lingered below the horizon, eternal in its waiting. The sky remained a single color, the color between remembrance and judgment. The traveler turned back toward the heart of the city, his steps slow, deliberate. The silence that once terrified him now felt sacred, a reminder that time itself bows to the command of the Creator. As he walked, the first grain of sand lifted into the air, floating weightless before him, a single sign that the moment of erasure was near. He understood now that the city had not fallen when its towers crumbled. It had fallen when it forgot to bow. The dawn had never returned because it no longer had permission to. The traveler closed his eyes, the whisper of wind passing through him like an echo of forgiveness denied. He opened them again to see the horizon glowing faintly, neither rising nor fading, suspended in the endless mercy of pause. And Allah knows best. The traveler stood motionless as the horizon trembled once more, the suspended light thinning into a pale veil that neither brightened nor faded. The air had grown colder, its stillness heavy with purpose. He could feel the shift beneath his feet, a soft rhythmic vibration that pulsed like breath drawn from the deep earth. The faint grain of sand that had lifted moments ago began to rise higher, followed by another and another, until the entire ground shimmered with floating dust. The silence deepened, resonant and vast, and then, with no sound, no warning, the earth exhaled. The dunes stirred like waves. The traveler staggered backward as the surface around him began to move, slow and deliberate, a motion not of wind, but of command. From the heart of the city, columns of sand spiraled upward, twisting into the air like smoke, erasing the outlines of walls and towers. The wind that returned was no longer gentle. It carried the scent of stone breaking, of history folding in upon itself. The traveler shielded his face as the storm rose higher. Yet even in its fury there was precision. Every grain knew its place. Every motion obeyed an unseen decree. Through the roaring veil of dust, he glimpsed the city's rooftops sinking, the tallest tower bowing to the earth as though in final submission. The sound of collapsing stone was swallowed by the wind, leaving only the rhythmic hiss of sand devouring structure. The traveler's torch extinguished in an instant, but the world around him glowed faintly, lit from within by the reflection of the moon's hidden light. He dropped to his knees, gripping the shifting ground, watching as the civilization that once defied the heavens dissolved into the very soil it had claimed as eternal. The storm circled him, a living halo of dust and remembrance. Faces seemed to appear briefly within the swirling sands, outlines of men and women, expressions frozen between pride and disbelief. Their voices were gone, yet their silence screamed louder than sound. He wanted to look away, but the vision held him still. It was not destruction. It was burial, swift, deliberate, merciful in its completeness. Each building folded into the earth like parchment closing over a story too long told. The traveler cried out, his voice snatched away by the wind. But within his chest, something shifted. Not fear, but revelation. He realized that he was not witnessing punishment, but purification. What the earth swallowed, it also cleansed. These ruins were not lost. They were being rewritten into dust, returned to the origin from which all things had come. He pressed his palms against the sand, feeling the warmth beneath it, the quiet hum of life still pulsing below. The earth remembered. It always remembered. The storm began to fade. The air grew still again, though the world was changed beyond recognition. Where a city had once stood, only dunes remained, smooth, endless, and eerily beautiful beneath the suspended light. The traveler rose slowly, brushing the sand from his cloak. He turned in every direction, but the landmarks were gone. Only the faint curve of the horizon remained to tell him where he stood. He stepped forward, and the sand gave way beneath his foot, soft and forgiving. Beneath its surface, he thought he saw a faint shimmer, gold and marble, buried but not forgotten. He whispered softly, "They are beneath us now." Not vanished, only hidden. The words drifted into the still air and seemed to linger, as if the desert itself listened. A single breeze moved across the dunes, reshaping their peaks into gentle arcs, as though sealing the city's grave with reverence. The traveler felt the weight of the moment press upon him, the silence, the vastness, the certainty that what lay below was both warning and witness. He looked toward the horizon, where the unmoving dawn still hovered, and took one final glance at the dunes behind him. The city was gone, yet its presence filled the air like a whisper that refused to die. As he began to walk, his footprints sank deep, and the sand closed softly over each step, erasing his path as he moved forward, as if reminding him that even memory must one day submit to time. And Allah knows best. The traveler moved across the dunes in silence, each step sinking softly into the earth that had swallowed the city whole. The wind had quieted again, as if exhausted by the act of remembrance. Yet beneath the stillness, he sensed movement, not of air, but of meaning, as though the land itself whispered lessons too vast for words. The horizon glowed faintly, still refusing to rise into day, suspended in an endless dusk. He paused and turned back one last time. The dunes shimmered like liquid gold, their shapes shifting slowly as if breathing, as if alive. The realization struck him. The city had not truly vanished. It was still here, entombed but eternal, hidden beneath its own arrogance. He descended a slope where the sand thinned into hard stone, revealing fragments of the buried world, the edge of a wall, the curve of a broken arch, the outline of a script half lost to erosion. He brushed the dust away and saw a single phrase etched deep into the rock. "We conquered time." The words glowed faintly, defiant even in ruin. His chest tightened. The sin had not been disbelief. It had been immortality, not of flesh but of pride. They had believed they could outlast the decree written for all creation. They built monuments not to honor their creator, but to defy the fleeting nature of life itself. He knelt before the inscription, feeling the roughness of the stone under his palm. "To conquer time," he murmured, "is to forget who created it." The air around him stirred lightly, as though acknowledging the truth. He could see now how their downfall had not come from an act of divine wrath, but from a command of balance. They had stepped beyond gratitude, seeking eternity without permission. In their pursuit of permanence, they became the very thing they feared, forgotten. A gust of wind rose suddenly, swirling around him in a spiral of golden dust. Within it he heard faint echoes. Not cries but proclamations, voices filled with certainty, declaring their greatness, their unbreakable legacy. Each echo fractured into silence until only one remained, a voice whispering not of glory, but of regret. It faded as quickly as it came, replaced by a deep, hollow quiet. The traveler lowered his head, realizing the truth had been simple all along. What seeks to live forever without Allah is destined to disappear. He looked to the sky, its color neither night nor day, and for a brief moment he thought he saw faint outlines within the suspended light, shapes of the city as it once stood, transparent and trembling like reflections in water. Towers, arches, and streets shimmered above the dunes before dissolving once more. It was as if the earth allowed him a final glimpse, a vision of what pride had cost. The sight was both beautiful and haunting, like a prayer left unanswered. As the illusion faded, the traveler sat in stillness, his thoughts heavy but clear. He understood now that the sin of immortality was not in their desire to endure, but in their refusal to remember. They wanted eternity on their own terms, a world without end, a name without humility. But eternity belongs only to the one whose command holds all things between be and it is. He closed his eyes and let the words settle within him like sand finding rest after wind. When he opened them, the dunes before him had stilled completely, their surface smooth and undisturbed. The silence felt softer now, almost forgiving. The traveler stood, brushing sand from his robe, and turned toward the open desert. Behind him lay a city buried by arrogance. Before him stretched the endless reminder of submission. He took a slow breath, tasting the dryness of the air, and whispered, "Everything seeks return." The wind responded with a single sigh that carried his words away, not lost, but accepted. He began to walk again, leaving behind the glittering dunes, the echoes of voices, and the illusion of permanence. With each step, the ground grew firmer, the air clearer. The lesson was no longer in the city's destruction, but in its silence. A silence that spoke of the fragility of power and the mercy of erasure. The traveler did not look back again. The earth had already closed its book, and Allah knows best. The traveler walked on until the dunes behind him dissolved into the horizon, their golden silence stretching endlessly beneath a sky that still refused to turn day. Each step felt lighter, yet heavier in thought, as though the weight of what he had witnessed sank deeper into his soul. The wind had returned in faint breaths, brushing across his face like the whisper of something unseen, following close behind. The land was empty, yet it felt alive, carrying a hum too quiet for the ear but impossible to ignore. It was not sound, it was remembrance. He stopped when the wind began to shift in rhythm, swirling around him in slow, deliberate patterns. It carried with it a faint murmur, not words, but recitation, like verses half remembered, their rhythm ancient and eternal. The traveler turned, searching the horizon, but saw nothing except dunes and shadow. Yet the sound grew clearer, flowing not from a place but through everything, the air, the ground, even the pulse within his chest. He dropped to his knees, pressing his palm to the sand, and the vibration met his skin like a living heartbeat. The earth was reciting. The realization sent a shiver through him. It was not human voice that echoed through the silence. It was creation itself remembering its Lord. Every grain of sand that had buried the city was now bearing witness, carrying verses that those people had once ignored. The wind rose softly again, repeating fragments of praise, weaving through the air in tones of sorrow and awe. The traveler closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. For the first time since he entered this valley, the silence felt sacred, no longer emptiness, but obedience. He listened deeply. Within the murmurs, he thought he heard a rhythm, patterns of repetition, like breaths aligning with remembrance. It was as though the city beneath the sand had begun to speak again, not in rebellion, but in repentance. The ruins were not dead. They were praising. Every buried arch, every shattered stone joined the chorus, repeating a truth their builders had once denied, that nothing endures except what remembers him. The traveler's eyes filled with tears. The unseen world, he realized, had never been silent. Humanity simply stopped listening. As he knelt there, the wind shifted direction, gathering force. A swirl of sand rose before him, spiraling upward until it formed a faint column of light. Within it, the echoes grew stronger, not chaotic, but harmonious, layered like voices praying in unison. The traveler felt no fear. He understood that what he was hearing was not for him alone. It was the echo of repentance carried across time, a song of remembrance written by those who had been erased. Their arrogance had vanished, but their submission now spoke louder than their pride ever had. The wind began to calm, and the column of light dissolved, scattering like dust into the air. Yet the sound lingered, soft and rhythmic, woven into the very pulse of the land. The traveler rose slowly, his heart steady, his spirit humbled. He knew that he had not been led here to witness destruction, but to hear what comes after, the voice of creation remembering its origin. He whispered softly, his words carried by the lingering breeze. Even the forgotten remember. For a moment, everything fell perfectly still. The dunes shimmered faintly under the unmoving light, and from somewhere far beneath, a low, resonant hum answered, not a word, but an acknowledgement. It was the world itself affirming what he had spoken. The traveler bowed his head, overwhelmed by a peace deeper than silence, and felt the presence of something vast yet merciful surrounding him. He understood now that the echoes of the past were not meant to haunt, but to remind. They spoke so that those who still walked upon the earth would never forget what pride buries and remembrance revives. The traveler turned his face toward the horizon once more, the faint sound of the unseen following him with every step, like prayer carried on air. Behind him, the dunes shimmered faintly, their hum continuing, a soft, eternal recitation that filled the valley with unending remembrance, and Allah knows best. The traveler continued onward, the soft murmur of the unseen still echoing behind him, fading into the vast quiet of the desert. The dunes stretched endlessly ahead, glowing faintly under the suspended light that refused to become day. His steps were slow but certain, the weight of what he had witnessed settling into his heart like scripture. The wind brushed against him again, lighter now, carrying not the sorrow of what was lost but the peace of what had been understood. Each gust felt purposeful, as though guiding him toward a place meant only for reflection. He stopped at the crest of a dune and looked back once more. The valley of the buried city lay hidden beneath golden silence, yet its memory pulsed faintly through the air. The echoes had quieted, replaced by a stillness that no longer felt empty. It was the silence of submission, the calm after remembrance. The traveler's gaze softened. He could almost see the outlines beneath the surface, the faint shapes of towers, walls, and streets, now part of the earth that had swallowed them. They were not gone. They had merely changed form. What had once reached toward the sky in pride now bowed humbly beneath it. He knelt and placed his hand on the warm sand. The ground vibrated faintly under his touch, steady and alive. In that moment, he understood the deeper meaning of what he had been shown. The erasure was never meant as punishment alone. It was purification, a mercy veiled in consequence. The people had built their greatness upon forgetfulness, and so Allah had written their reminder into the dust itself, ensuring that their story would speak forever through silence. Their monuments had perished, but their lesson endured. Every grain beneath his palm was a verse of warning and mercy intertwined. He whispered, "What is buried still speaks." The words seemed to awaken something beneath the surface. A faint hum rose again, softer than before, like a heartbeat in the distance, and for a moment, the sand beneath his fingers grew warmer, almost luminous. He closed his eyes, feeling the presence of remembrance surrounding him, not in sound, but in peace. The city's fall was no longer tragedy. It was transformation. What they had built from arrogance, Allah had returned to humility. What they had claimed as eternal, he had reminded, was temporary. The traveler drew a small leather-bound book from his cloak, its pages worn and blank. He took a shard of stone and began to write, not names, not history, but reflection. His words flowed slowly, shaped not by the desire to record but to remember. Power fades, pride sinks, and time erases all that refuses to bow. But mercy remains even in the silence of the earth. He paused, staring at what he had written, then added, "Those who listen to the echoes will never repeat their cries." The wind rose briefly, lifting a veil of sand that drifted across the pages like breath. He closed the book and held it to his chest. As he stood, the horizon shimmered faintly, not bright, but calm, as though light itself had finally exhaled. For the first time since he had entered the valley, the sun began to stir, its first rays breaking through the suspended veil of twilight. The world around him glowed softly, every grain of sand illuminated, each one a testament to the same truth. Nothing is forgotten, only rewritten. The wind carried the faintest sound, a single note, pure and distant, like creation remembering its origin once more. The traveler turned away from the valley and began his journey home, the desert behind him returning to silence. Yet within that silence lay everything, the fall, the remembrance, the forgiveness. He knew he would never see the world the same again. The sands beneath his feet no longer felt like dust, but like scripture, verses shaped by the hands of time, sealed by the will of the one who allows all things to rise and fall. He walked until the dunes swallowed his footprints and the horizon turned gold with morning. The world had moved again, its stillness lifted. The city remained beneath the sand, but its lesson lingered in every whisper of the wind. The traveler smiled faintly, his voice quiet but certain as he spoke into the dawn. What is erased in the world is remembered in eternity, and Allah knows best.